Hello, welcome to your June Wildlife Questions Answered. I'm Jamie, and in this video, I'm joined by the RSPB's wildlife gardening expert, Adrian Thomas.
Hi, Jamie. Good to be here.
Thank you very much for joining us for this one, because we've got some very gardening type questions. They're all focused on how you bring wildlife into your garden and what you should be doing at this time of year. Now, first of all, I'd like to ask you a little bit about the RSPB's Nature on Your Doorstep, because this is a brand new thing we're doing, isn't it? And it's a place where people can get all sorts of useful resources.
Yeah, we've done loads in terms of doing things for wildlife in your outside space over the years. But you're right. This year, this spring, we've launched Nature on Your Doorstep. It's an online place where you can find information, videos, blogs, bits of me on screen, all kinds of stuff to give you the inspiration that you need. And we'll also be building a kind of forum where people will be able to ask questions, receive answers, share all the great stuff that they've been doing in their outside space.
Well, that sounds brilliant. And there's a newsletter you can sign up for as well, I think, isn't there, that you can get every month?
Every month they'll get to see me as well, doing my stuff and showing what the pertinent things are to be doing at that moment to ensure your outside space is absolutely bursting with wildlife.
And I'm going to show the web address on the screen now. So head over there after you've watched this video, and you can find out lots more. Now, our first question is around birds and nesting in gardens. And many of us have got nest boxes up, but nest boxes aren't the only place birds will nest in your garden. Is there a way that you can deliberately provide space for birds to raise their chicks without having to put a box up?
It's such a good point because there's only a limited suite of bird species in the garden that actually use nest boxes. Your blue tits, your great tits. These days, many people put up a box with a slightly bigger hole for house sparrows, which is really important because they're a red listed species. Go for a supersized box and you've got starlings. But having said that, you're not then looking after your robins and your blackbirds and your dunnocks and your wrens and your goldfinches, greenfinches, chaffinches. And for each of them, they have a particular place that they really look for a nest site. And they're different for each one. So for example, for a goldfinch, it's in a tree out on the outermost branches where they're a little bit flimsy and predators can't reach them. But that's different than a chaffinch, which likes the fork in a tree, but needs a tree, doesn't want a bush, wants a tree. Greenfinches love to have an evergreen bush to start the season with their first brood, and then they'll move into normally a deciduous tree for a second brood. Again, they're looking for a fork. So it's this curious thing that providing nesting sites for a whole suite of birds in the garden means putting in all of these different types. And then that many people go, oh, that sounds really difficult, Adrian, if I'm having to think of each and every bird that's out there. So I love cutting to the chase with this one. Once you put up your nest boxes for your whole nesting species, for most of the rest of the birds, if you've got thick, dense bushes down towards ground level and trees growing up for those birds that like higher nesting places, then you pretty much delivered everything that those birds want. But if you've only got one or two of those nesting places, that really reduces birds' choice. So the more you can provide choice in terms of bushes and trees, the more that you're offering different nesting sites for different species.
Thank you. That's brilliant. And I think for a lot of us, we tend to think about putting up a nest box and that's it. That's all you need to do. But there is so much more you can be providing, and often not with a lot of effort, because climbers are quite good as well, aren't they? Climbers, ivy, clematis, something with a bit of thickness that birds can get into and get under and hide in.
Absolutely. I kind of call those two-dimensional trees, really. And they're great for an outside space where you've only got a limited amount of room to put in a tree. Now, you can do it with a small fruit tree, but if you've got a wall or a fence, then great. Yeah, put in a climbing plant. As you say, ivy is particularly good for it. Anything that has evergreen structure or a solid structure, people who go the full hog and have a wisteria, perfect, because it provides these solid places where birds can build their nests. Something that's flimsier like a clematis, not so great for a nesting site, but it is providing that dense cover in all sorts of places in your outside space. The more, the better.
Lots to choose from there. Now, another thing that people often do in their gardens is put up a little bee hotel. And we make these bug hotels, bee hotels. We attach them to walls, attach them to the side of your shed. You can make a little pile and put a roof on top of it. But how do you know they're being used? Because I have one in my garden and I'm not convinced the bees, the solitary bees, are making the most of it. Are there any tips on putting these in the right places so they actually get bees moving in?
I'd say this is more than a tip. This is a golden rule, really, because people talk about bug hotels and bee hotels, and it's important to realize that they're really two different things. So bug hotels often work best in a damp, shady corner where beetles and woodlice and centipedes can use them. But bee hotels for solitary bees must be in a sunny, south-facing position. That's what the solitary bees are looking for, and that's where I see the most mistakes happening. Make sure you've got that sheltered, sunny position where the warmth really allows those young bees to develop within their nest tunnels. Also, second golden rule is I see bee hotels that are kind of hung from trees or branches and are swinging around. That's kind of difficult when you're a queen bee trying to like come in and land. They're looking for something that's solidly placed. So follow those two golden rules and you're really on the right path to success with your solitary bees. In terms of are they being used or not, in those kind of positions, you will see activity, but in particular, you will see the results of leaf cutter bees, where they've cut these little discs of your rose leaves and all sorts of plant leaves, beautifully neat, bring them in, roll them up, pop them into the tunnels. And once they've created this line of nesting cells, then right at the end, you can see the green mush that they've chewed up and used to block off the entrance to the tunnel. And sometimes you can come to your bee hotel and think, whoa, they have been busy. I didn't see anything happening. And yet there are multiple of these tunnels that have been blocked off by the leafcutter bees.
Thank you very much. Very useful tips there. And our next question is around what we should be doing in general, because we're getting into June now, we're coming up towards July. Are there any essential things we should be doing in our gardens to make homes for wildlife?
Yeah, it's a lovely time of year, June and July. A lot of the flowers are blooming. So I would say that the critical things at this point, keep on top of your weeds. They will still be germinating and growing at this point. If you've got a lawn area with longer grass as a meadow, then keep cutting the paths through it. They're useful for wildlife and they're great for you to get through that meadow area. But the really useful thing to do at this time of year is to sow the seeds of biennial flowers for next year. And so many of them are brilliant for wildlife. Foxgloves, forget-me-nots, honesty, sow them now because they'll need to create a little rosette ready to come on and bloom next spring.
That reminds me of when I grew teasel from seed and I was really disappointed because nothing happened the first year. So it's another one of those biennials, isn't it? You get that sort of flat rosette and you have to wait until the following year for it to come up, but it's well worth it, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's so easy to do.
So talking a little bit about plants, another question we get as we get into the warmer weather and we start to see butterflies coming into our gardens, how do I attract butterflies in? How do I get them to stick around? And what are the actual plants that I need to have in my garden to draw in these beautiful insects?
And we've got two elements here. One is that to have butterflies, then they've got to have had the right food for the caterpillars. And butterflies tend to be really picky about this. And there are some crucial plants to grow, such as bird's foot trefoil, which is used by the common blue butterfly. You will hear about nettles, and there are 4 species of British butterfly that really like nettles. So having a little patch of nettles, sometimes it's difficult to get butterflies breeding on a small patch, but it's worth a try if you've got space for it. So yeah, look, and our website will have plenty of information about this, the right plants to put in for your caterpillars. And then obviously what we want to see are the adult butterflies nectaring on beautiful blooms. Buddleia is always put up there as a top butterfly plant, and it is, but we've got some concerns about Buddleia because it's invasive. So my top tips for plants which are great alternatives to Buddleia, well, I'm going to give you one. If you grow no other, grow marjoram. Great kitchen herb. It is wonderful for all sorts of butterflies coming and nectaring. So find yourself a nice cheap marjoram plant from your local plant nursery, buy it in peat-free compost, pop it in at nice sunny position, guaranteed to get butterflies visiting it.
I've got
Always
some.
worries me when I give guarantees.
I was just going to say, I think that's a fine guarantee to have, because I've got some, and the bees love it too. When it's in full flower and the sun is on it, it's buzzing. So yeah, really, really good example of a plant that actually helps us to use in cooking, but also brings the insects in. Now, you mentioned peat-free compost here, which takes me to my final question, which is about composting in general. And this is something we're all trying to do at home now. Those of us who've got the space. Are there any kind of key tips here? Because obviously we want to compost to make our own compost to fuel our own plants, but also those compost heaps are really good for birds and animals to make use of. How do we get the best out of compost? What are the key things about building a compost heap that's going to work?
Yeah, and we're once again into golden rule territory here. So the golden rule of compost is mix up your green material with your brown material. If you only have green, like grass clippings, it'll go mushy and smelly. If you only have brown, it's too dry, it won't rot. And brown can be ripped up cardboard, toilet tubes, those kind of things. Mixed in with your greens, that will provide the mix that really allows decomposition to happen in a wonderful and wholesome and unsmelly way. So that is a really important thing to do. Also, don't put in cooked food onto there. Don't put in dairy, don't put in meat. That's the kind of stuff that will attract rodents to the compost heap. So just keep it to vegetable peelings and all of those weeds that you've collected in the garden before they've gone to seed. If you put the seeds in, it's unlikely that the decomposition will get rid of those weed seeds for you. So you'll be spreading this year's weed seeds next year if you do that. Follow those rules, preferably in an open-sided compost heap, like one made out of old wooden pallets, and you'll get great nutrients for the garden. And my rule is, if the garden produces it, the garden keeps it. It's gold dust. Use it.
Thank you, Adrian. That was wonderful. And you can read more about our tips for bringing nature into your garden on the Nature on Your Doorstep part of our website. Thank you very much, Adrian.
Lovely. Thanks, Jamie.